different people respond to different types of like pleasure input, right? And like higher order pleasures are things like enjoying the opera and intellectual challenge and debate and the arts and building and conceiving of things and leading and that sort of, those are higher order pleasures. And lower order pleasures are kind of like quick hit, relatively like ho hum little pleasures throughout the day that
that's
anybody
me
can
on my
enjoy.
phone games. I'm just phone gaming.
Yeah. So maybe you're a lower pleasure guy and you're in the wrong line of business. You know?
Yeah, no, I'm a trash person. I know that. I know.
I didn't say that.
That's fine.
I
Yeah, you didn't say it. Every time I have to explain it to somebody because they're like, "Oh, Simon, you got a big fancy job. You have a master's degree. What kind of books do you read?" I'm like, "Stuff with dragons, primarily."
That's okay.
Only, actually, if I'm being honest, I've never read a book that wasn't required for school or work that didn't have a dragon in it because I don't want to read boring stuff. Had enough of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dave, what's the last book you read that featured
with and without dragons? Make sure you give me both.
When's the last time I read a book with a dragon?
This is a great like party question.
I assume Harry Potter or Game of Thrones when I was like in middle school.
Harry Potter.
Middle school.
It was Harry Potter for me, and that was 20 years ago. So
drag. All right. Well,
Simon, Darren publicly shamed me because he took a screen grab of what's behind me here because I got a huge bookshelf on the other side of this wall, which is the entire family's, right? There's 1,000 books on it of every type and color. But Darren was like, "What's Dave virtue signaling?" Took a screenshot of that, found every book, and then publicized the list. And it's not it's not very impressive. It's like the Ranger Handbook, the Hornady Reloading Guide, the Infantry Officer's Guide to
no man
not
in
good.
a tank top can judge your bookshelf. That's not how that works.
No, they can judge away. It's just who's listening. That's my job.
Who's listening?
Tank top guy didn't like my reading selection. Yeah.
Are you only a written word dragon consumer?
Primarily written word, because I feel like the films that include dragons are rarely ever of the same quality. I think the last time there was a dragon movie that I really liked, and it was panned culturally, but it was Reign of Fire, starring Matthew McConaughey, Christian Bale. What a dream team cast before they were huge. Like that one got me.
Actually, was a pretty good movie, I thought. I don't know why it got panned.
Yeah,
honestly.
I mean, it got panned. I don't care why. Because it, like, especially when it came out, I think I was still in high school, and that was right down the middle. Post-apocalyptic society, dudes fighting dragons with axes. Like, yeah, oh man.
Yeah.
One of
the two of them had a legit beard too. I remember.
Yeah, I'll take all that you got.
Yeah.
We all wanted to be Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah,
That
dude.
exact attire.
He shows up, starts drafting people. He's like, all right, the volunteer portion is over. It's time for the draft. I'll never forget that line.
There's a chance that I still want to be Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, it's fair.
There's a chance.
All right.
Okay, welcome to the Goat Rodeo Podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Smith, joined by regular co-hosts Simon Kuhn and Dave Caudill. We're all from a company called Reveal. We riff and ramble around topics like geopolitics, venture capital, the defense and aerospace industry, startups operating in the space, hill stuff, hill people, and everything in between. And
multiple types of hill people.
Multiple types of hill people. I'll say right now, though, apologies for not being on last week. It was the first week that we've missed dropping a pod all year. And I feel that very deeply. I know producer Ian had some heartache, so much heartache that he turned his phone off and went into the woods all weekend and hunted elk. So sorry, Ian, and sorry, audience, who were teased last week with.
Also, sorry to the elk.
Well, they didn't get elk. I don't think they got any. So
All right. Well, great weekend to get elk.
So it's a great weekend. Actually, it wasn't. It was the opener it was rifle opening weekend. So a lot of elk died this last weekend. So anyway, sorry to the elk and sorry to the audience for missing us last week. Okay, big in geopolitics. Got a few different topics we could tee up. I'm just going to tee up Trump because his #Trump name often I don't know, is the indicator of the big thing going on. He's on an Asia tour. Some pretty big items as it pertains to the defense and aerospace industry and the national security set. Strategic arms sales and commitments with Japan, I think he's on the docket to speak in South Korea about strategic shipbuilding. That's been a topic coming along for a while with folks that we know in the Hyundai heavy grouping. And there's a lot of interest and investment into the Asian geography and a lot of commitments. So, Simon, you have top of mind thoughts, comments on the Trump train as it rolls around the APAC periphery?
I mean, Japan's a really interesting one right now. New prime minister. I don't know if you saw, there's like a really interesting gift exchange there where she gave him Shinzo Abe's putter, which, well documented, like love and affection between Trump and Abe. The specifics, this is fairly common. Specifics were light. Trump gave a speech on an aircraft carrier, mid-rift, made some jokes, talked a bit about Japanese investment in American automaking, and then talked about, giving F-35s to Japan.
Which is a big deal, right?
Totally.
It's a big deal.
I mean, and we've given them F-35s before. They were one of the early recipients of that platform. But I mean, I think you have to look at the entire Asia trip through the lens of China, right? The purpose of this is to signal everywhere you go, these are our friends, and these are the things we're doing for each other, and we don't need you, and we can push.
And at the same time, Trump's stated goal around one of many stated goals, I suppose, is to advance a trade discussion or dialogue with China and reach some conclusions, which I think there have been some positive signaling. There's been positive signaling coming out of both sides, China and the United States, and others engaged in those dialogues. This is, I think, probably the big thing that Trump won't say his presidency is all about, or would be kind of the crowning achievement of a Trump administration. But a big deal there would be a big deal.
Sure. But it's interesting because one of the interesting things I think about it, right, is, speaking from an aircraft carrier and talking about a weapons platform that we have long been on the hook for with Japan, we're kind of tying military policy to trade goals. It's like an explicitly trade-focused mission, but it's got a military flavor everywhere it goes. So at least, sort of intellectually and philosophically, there's a concerted attempt by the admin to tie the trade negotiations with military allies. And, this is a military coalition of folks.
Well, and we've known for quite a long time, we even participated in industry roundtables on Capitol Hill to support this effort. But the Trump administration and allies in Congress, in the House Foreign Affairs Committee anyway, if not elsewhere, have been pretty aggressively pursuing foreign military sales reform, adjustments, accelerations, and whatever, the leaning down of that process to facilitate more voluminous, more valuable foreign military sales of tech and hardware, F-35 being one of those affected items. And I think that this is an important element in the Trump administration peace strategy, which is sell military hardware to friends so that they can help us maintain the peace without embroiling everybody in conflict. So there's some balancing going on. I do wonder how much Elbridge Colby over at DoD in the plans shop is happy or not happy with the way things are playing out. He was the kind of definitive prioritize Asia, deprioritize Europe and other geographies. Let's get into Asia and confront the big adversary, China. I wonder if this is satisfying him and that camp in the admin.
I mean, it's very clear to me that the Trump admin is soliciting, wherever possible, direct investment from these Asian companies into American industries. You see it with Japanese automaking, and you see it in a very large way with South Korean shipbuilding. So I got to imagine some of this is just a marriage of two different camps within the admin, because, Colby's position is obviously very powerful, but it has nothing to do with these soliciting foreign investment into domestic industry. He's just not playing in those games.
Well, I do think that it, I got to believe he's in a general sense supportive and enthused about this effort, because economic focus and economic development and progress not only de-risks the idea of conflict, but enhances ties and geostrategic kind of energy and focus in the direction of Asia, which is, I think, clearly a priority for this administration. So pretty interesting stuff. We'll see how this thing wraps and if a deal actually comes to fruition with China or something else. Anything else on that, Dave? You're silent.
I didn't follow it, but in line with this Asian Pacific tour, we had a presence. Our company had a presence at Seoul International Aerospace and Defense Exhibition. There's quite a bit of overlap. It was interesting. ADEX 2025,
right.
I think is the acronym. The reports are pretty interesting. I think that South Korea made some pretty public and strong assertions that they intend to be a meaningful player in defense exports by 2030 and are making appropriate investments there. There was a theme of, the globalization of autonomous warfare and the development of cheap, effective autonomous systems that were on display at the show.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously an important market, and if the Trump administration has its way, then more and more resourcing will go not only to U.S. Equities in the region, but the combined and allied space as well, which includes Korea. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. On the topic of UAS, I'll throw a minor deal book item out there, and then maybe we can pivot definitively into the deal books stuff. But AV, formerly AeroVironment, I believe they're actually just referred to as AV now. AV apparently took something like $100 million order for counter-UAS missile systems, and I think they're deploying those to some discrete locations for low rate kind of fielding and production there. I'm on the one hand skeptical because AV, just like many of the legacy players, simply play the game of compliance and long-term forecasting and requirements influencing in order to win sizable business, even if the technology being fielded isn't best in class or fit for purpose for real world environments. We've seen that with all the foreign military sales type stuff from primes going into places like Ukraine, where tech is just ineffective and elsewhere. But at the same time, this is underscoring the need for counter-UAS capability. And so these are missile systems. I got to believe these are probably oriented at larger systems. I don't really know kind of the price differential or price ratio calculation that you do for larger exquisite platforms makes sense to go to a legacy player for a relatively high-end product that probably costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, per shot. Whereas there is going to be increased attention going toward the small or hyper-tactical level, cheap, lightweight, highly distributed counter-UAS solutions. So I don't know, Dave, do you have comments or thoughts on that contracting item that I mentioned before, which is legacy player seemingly wiring stuff for itself, even if it's not to good effect, but the reality of the counter-UAS kind of market?
Yeah, I think you're on it. I think it's, I do like to see the investment in this very hard problem, right? This is the IED of for those of us that served in GWAT, this is the IED of right now and the future. And honestly, the problem is probably even bigger than the IED problem was or would be for our service members downrange, much bigger. Yeah. I'm sure that AeroVironment came about this body of work and as you described. I think the solution, or at least what I've seen of it is facing like Group 2 or Group 3, stuff that flies at 5,000, 20,000 feet is over 1,000 pounds. So it's shooting down small. Well, I don't even think of it as shooting down UAS systems as we think about the small quadcopter kind of Group 1 situations. It's shooting down small airplanes, I think. And it's like probably tube launched or launched from a vehicle or launched from something that looks like a mortar. And yeah, I would imagine $300,000 maybe $500,000 per shot. Probably a pretty expensive and exquisite solution to detect, track, and interdict.
So maybe we were planning on getting to this later in the discussion, but since we're already on it, maybe we just dive in briefly now. But you made reference to the idea of drones and maybe one-way attack, FPV style effectors being the new IED. And my understanding was that over the course of the joint IED defeat organization, JIDO, there was something like $1 trillion spent on trying to figure that problem out and make it safe for servicemen and women to operate in austere environments where IEDs were present. And you're referencing kind of the rise of the FPV, or the highly proliferate, low cost, attritable one-way attack style drone platforms as being an even bigger problem. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about like the next 5 years, 10 years, we're going to see $1 trillion spent by the U.S. and perhaps Western partners on solving this problem? What is the scope of that opportunity?
Yeah, I've never done the math, so I can't confirm or deny whether it was actually $1 trillion. But yeah, JIDO in its many forms and names, and its joint interagency nature, its authority and funding, spent a ton of money over years as service members were, engaged in two wars on two fronts, and the enemy's chosen weapon system was the improvised explosive, or the roadside bomb. And I think that with the formation of JIDA 401, the Joint Interagency Task Force for counter-UAS, it's going to be very similar. I think that they're going to invest in and procure in a meaningful way, meaningful volumes, and make meaningful investments in every part of this problem. I think that all the way from securing our airfields against something that looks like an Operation Spiderweb attack, to securing our battleships, to buying systems like the AV system to secure convoys and smaller operations posts or sized units, all the way down to what are we going to do about the individual dismount caught in the open. I think that this agency is going to spend this task force is going to spend an extraordinary amount of Uncle Sam's taxpayer money trying to solve this very hard problem, and it is hard. The detection, the tracking, the interdiction systems, like when you're facing a swarm of small UAS systems, there's going to be a lot of rapid technology advancement to try to solve this hard problem.
Yeah, I mean, I've been out in the Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine, area, and that threat is real on both sides, right? Both sides of that conflict, and I think that's underscoring the reality of what's likely to come in the event of open conflict yeah.
And I think your point about this is probably going to play out over a decade or more is correct, because to draw the parallel back to the joint interagency, to JIDO or related, in GY, we fielded jammers, and then the adversary went to command wires. We're seeing something very similar play out with wired guided control of UAS systems. So they will probably put a strategy in the field. We'll see an adaptation to that strategy, and then we'll go back and try something new, and then we'll end up with some variety of mine rollers, and then V-shaped holes, and then some parallel to that in the robotics and counter robotics game.
I want to clear up a little bit about this AV program, because we're talking about two very different topics here. I mean, the interceptors for this they're missiles.
Yes,
this is missile-based counter-UAS, which is like a whole different type of ball game
for larger platforms.
And this particular one was a Blue Halo missile, and I was like, I know this thing is familiar, and I did some Googling while we were talking. Relatively, I mean, their only competition on that contract, I remember, it was Raytheon.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't even this is so far away from like the disruptive space that they are fully the disruptor on this vehicle. Full stop. I think the only other interceptor that's cheaper than these two, that Raytheon and that Blue Halo one, are the Iron Dome interceptors. And I still don't really understand how Iron Dome interceptors are as cheap as they are. But even then, these are like $100,000 interceptors, are like dramatically cheaper than what a Stinger, for example, is a $500,000 missile. Like a Stinger man-pad that we're all familiar with.
Stinger's what I've got in my mind for this.
Right. So like a Stinger's $400,000-$500,000, and this is like a fifth of that. So I actually, this program's super interesting. I don't actually know how they're launching them though.
I think it's this initial deployment for them, and I could be mixing news stories or stuff that I've read here. It's fixed site security around like critical infrastructure. So
that's the test I saw were all fixed site stuff.
That's right.
I don't know of any other platform.
It's good. Grand Forks is there's a facility in Grand Forks, I think, that was
interesting
target for, or one of the target deployment geographies for this.
But in the context of this organization that Garrett's describing, they're going to have to address all of it.
I don't think
from air to air.
This is going to that same joint office. I feel like this is going to continue to live under the missile side of the Army.
I think that this task force will consume the body of work that's been done in the consortiums. It'll probably consume a portion of the missile people's budget. Yeah, I think that this task force is going to be responsible for not just securing soldiers and combat units, but installations against things that look like spiderweb. I think they're probably going to be responsible for securing battleships as well.
It seems very strange. It seems like very different problem sets to me. Shooting down a Shaheed is a whole different game from shooting down Group 1, particularly autonomous Group 1s and swarms. We start getting into that.
I think it's a difference in scale. It's just a difference in scale.
But all this stuff has to combine into a layered approach, right? I mean, somebody's got to figure out the stack of technologies when the Shaheed comes to bomb in preparation for the for the smaller swarm. And they've got to share detection and tracking information. Like there's 10 or 20 layers there that probably all need to work together. Which is why you would make a joint interagency task force and give it a ton of authority to do that.
I think that what we're going to see is this entire category blending and merging together as energy and resourcing is applied to it. And we're going to revisit this topic for sure and understand more as it expands. I do think that it's sort of in the same vein as the replicator contracting activity that happened earlier this year or late last year that I always get a little bit activated over. There are a couple of legacy players who already do a thing and have something that's ready, and they need to buy it and deploy it soon, if not for operational impact, then certainly for symbolism and signaling that this is an important thing. And we'll see the rise of more innovative players as this whole industry kind of evolves and emerges beyond the Ukraine context and meeting in the middle between, something like the Ukraine context and something like this, AV Group 3 counter drone missile system.
Simon's got a good point, which is probably where's the line break? Do we care if it's a manned or unmanned? So at some point it's a red aircraft.
Doesn't matter,
right? Yeah, so
it's just an aircraft,
right? Exactly.
That's why I kind of think it's just a difference of scale, right? Scale and volume, and so like cost has to scale as you go up because these are relatively more exquisite things you're targeting with relatively more exquisite munitions. And hopefully there's something like very tactical, which is the stuff that we care about most. What is the individual warfighter going to do in the advent of a 10 drone FPV swarm that's coming for his fire team, right? Like it's the same problem, just different scale.
I'm splitting hairs a little bit, but I don't agree. I think long-range missile interception is an entirely different technical challenge from close-in air defense. In fact, like every sensor that we think about as this layered approach is not even able to detect at the range that the long-range missile interceptors are intercepting at. It's an entirely different, like you cannot build a radar that does both, right? You have radars that do just long range and you have radars that do just short range. So they're layered in that they're next to each other. But the long-range interceptors do only long-range interceptor stuff, and they basically become useless once you get inside that window. So, like, I agree with Dave in that, like, this is a part of the layering for a very complete air defense. But to this, like, question that we think about with disruptors, it is extraordinarily difficult, maybe even impossible, for a startup to build a company with your flagship product to be, I'm doing long-range missile interception. I don't know of any. I'm assuming Anduril has some options now, but I don't know that I've heard of anyone building long-range missile interceptors as their like disruptive capability. That's such a weird, technical, horribly capital-intensive space,
Didn't we hear or understand that whatever this Golden Dome initiative turns into, that some of those new innovative players, newish or innovative-ish players, are going to be in the mix? So that's Anduril and Palantir and all these other ones. I think we've heard that. I'm not saying.
I think there'll be some really interesting questions there around two things. One, are you going to let them meaningfully play, or are you going to take like little widgets from them while the interceptor is still a Raytheon or whomever?
Sure.
Because that kind of expertise, this is like the SpaceX problem, right? For a long time, it was just God, what was the launch? ULA. It was just ULA that did space launch, because like building this from scratch isn't so hard, and it's not quite as hard as space launch, but it's hard enough that there's only like 5 companies making missiles to shoot down things in the sky. Like that's horribly complicated.
This is kind of why I think it's a bit confusing that there's so much like positive energy right now on companies like Saronic that are talking about building the next generation of autonomous surface vessels, when they don't have the infrastructure necessary to do that at speed and scale yet. And maybe they get there, and I hope they do. I think you need innovative energy in that space. Yeah. But who are we talking about really? It's HII and Hyundai Heavy and like these, these legacy players who have the process infrastructure, human capital, talent, all of the stuff. The supply chains are nailed down, right? Like So I think innovation can happen in lots of different ways, and I don't want to like cast us as the people who only care about the startup space. I think what we care about is innovation wherever it comes from, and meaningfully innovating and getting the innovation uptake engine spinning, right? So like I think that's probably what we care about most. And in this topic area of counter UAS, maybe you are, maybe you aren't splitting hairs, but I think this thing is going to evolve, and it's going to get pretty big and weird, and the spectrum is going to be pretty wide.
I think it's a great example of where people should be thinking much more in depth at like what counter-UAS actually means, because it's going to mean a lot of different things in a lot of different scenarios. I don't think anyone's going to build any sort of tool that is like, yeah, here's my one-size-fits-all counter-UAS tool. Like, all right, well, here's the 6 counter-UAS to defeat it. I need 6 different tools that need to work with each other.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I think what we are realizing is that there are no good solutions in this space, even from the players who talk a big game about deploying meaningful, real counter-UAS technology to places like Ukraine. And, those companies who are known to be actively failing while telling a different story are well known in this industry. Let's pivot on that note to a dealbook item. Friend of the pod, I'm going to call him friend of the pod, although not yet, has never joined us, and maybe he will. But Brian Stream, founder and CEO at a company called Vermeer, just announced a $10 million Series A last week, led by Draper and a few others, to include AeroX, folks who are known to us, Rockaway Ventures. They've got some Techstars impact in there too. So anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up isn't because it was some massive venture deal, or because Vermeer is, the next, great defense company, or at least not yet. Maybe they will be. I wish Brian all the success in the world. But he has spent the last roughly 2 years, I know this because of many personal conversations with him, he spent roughly the last 2 years living in Ukraine and working with the Ukrainian counter-drone supply chains, and has expressed elevating levels of frustration with legacy players who talk a big game, come into that theater, suck up a bunch of energy, time, resources, credibility from the West, deploy things that don't work, and then everybody kind of gets a black eye from it. Vermeer, to the extent that they have been involved in Ukraine, have developed or improved or maybe refined a product called the Visual Positioning System, VPS. VPS, which is like a physical hardware plus some software augmentation to drone platforms that allows for visual navigation that gets beyond this kind of spoofing and GPS denied, GNSS denied environment along that front line in Ukraine. Here's a philosophical question. So should we, as Western defense startups, be building for the operating environment on display right now on the Ukraine-Russia front, or should we be building to requirements as defined by the U.S. DoD and other Western allies and partners? Dave, you're smiling.
Neither. That's my stand.
Neither.
Option
Okay.
C.
All right. Okay. Option C, neither. Option D, all of the above.
Not all of the above.
Not all of the above.
I think those are both bad things.
They're both bad things. Tell me why each are bad.
I think Ukraine, like the GWAT before it, the technological advancements that took place in these very ad hoc, innovative, iterative processes, i.e., people under existential threat building their own stuff on the fly, and there will probably never be a bureaucratic process that can keep pace with something like that. But to the extent that we want to build anything, we should build with that in mind. How do I build the process that does its best to keep pace with that? I am less interested in specific technological solutions because they're going to get outdated. I'm more concerned with breaking this paradigm entirely.
It probably has outlined or underscored three elements of any future conflict that are likely to be present. One is the proliferation of electronic warfare capabilities. So this is like jamming of, disruption of comms, and other kind of data transmission and, up and down link control stacks for various assets, all that stuff. The second is maybe a subset of that, and it's GPS spoofing, GPS denial, and navigation denial capabilities that are kind of under this alt-nav or alt-nav bucket of capability. So that's yet another kind of reality of a modern battlefield that's becoming more and more digitized, and saturated with EW capabilities. And the last is drone warfare. So we saw it in Armenia, Azerbaijan a number of years ago. We even saw some forms of quadcopter-based aggression and certainly surveillance in the counter-ISIS days 10, 15 years ago. But at some level, this is small drones evolved in Ukraine, Russia, and you got to believe that the next conflict, certainly the next asymmetric conflict, will feature drones in that way. So I think I agree with you that like getting too focused on the Ukraine-Russia context and building tech here in the U.S. to sell to the U.S. that is operable in that Ukraine environment might not be the right approach. But I think there are some realities that are emerging in this conflict that we should learn from and apply to future plans.
Absolutely, plenty of lessons to learn. Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
No, I was actually going to basically strongly agree with Garrett here. So the answer to the question you originally posed, I would say yes, build to Ukraine, but be selective on problems that are applicable elsewhere, or we can envision being applicable elsewhere in the global conflict. The requirements at home will catch up, and it's part of our job as industry to help them understand the art of possible, both from a technical perspective and what else is happening in the world in places that companies like Vermeer can be that US DoD shouldn't. And I agree with you. The future battlefield looks like. Why is there a thumbs up on my screen? I don't get it. I guess because I restarted my computer.
You can turn that off. I'll walk you through it.
Yeah, thank you. But I agree. The future battlefield, the common denominator here, it's going to be covered in thousands of robotic and autonomous systems. There's going to be a battle in the air, in the air littoral, robot versus robot, human versus robot. We're going to attempt to jam and employ WFX and kinetic solutions. And I would imagine that a capability like Vermeer is one that we should cherry pick from the Ukraine conflict, because if it can navigate other than a radio signal being transmitted to it, that's probably that probably features in our plan to employ robotic systems either in a conflict or just as a deterrent. We can employ we can employ a robotic army or robotic capabilities without them being jammed or shut down.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. It sounds like we're all kind of agreeing with Simon. So well done, Simon. Point, Simon Kuhn. Point, Simon Kuhn.
From team.
So there is always the chance that you overlearn lessons from a conflict like this. And I suppose at some level, it's better that we're learning and maybe even overlearning lessons from a context like this because we're not actively involved in it, rather than just kind of sitting back and letting it happen and not learning at all. I do think that Brian and Vermeer are attempting to segue learnings from operationally relevant technology in the Ukraine context built over many years of refinement with that supply chain and that conflict zone, bridging it back to an American buyer set, and we'll see how that shakes out. And I really do wish them all the success in the world. Okay, well, what should we talk about next? We've got an ongoing government shutdown. Simon, do you want to talk about that? Or Dave, do you have other go-to-market oriented topics? Where do you want to go next?
I've got one more. One more. There was an interesting new policy starting with the Army, but I think it's intended to be DoD wide, right to repair.
Mm.
And I think Simon's familiar with this new policy as well. That's basically saying, okay, like the units in this and the combat forces, they have more stuff. That stuff is complicated and it breaks. And if you fix it, you're currently violating the contract or the warranty. So from an acquisitions perspective, we should start allowing units and soldiers and et cetera, sailors and Marines to fix things themselves. It's not a brand new problem. A unit's been able to fix a Humvee but a unit's been able to fix a Humvee or a rifle in the past. And as they get more of these systems that are complicated, we were just talking about small UAS or counter-UAS systems that are complicated systems. There's optical trains, there's tracking, there's software involved. Right now, if you have a FLIR Black Hornet 3 or a small UAS system in your unit and it breaks, not because it's designed poorly, just because these are complicated systems and they're asked to do some pretty challenging things, you got to send it back to the manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
You can't touch it. And I think, and we've talked about it in this podcast before, that we envision a future where a lot of these combat units are leaning into their own logistics and sustainment activities, where they almost become their own small factories, right? Like not like a Boeing plant, but they're producing and weaponeering and fixing their own stuff. So right to repair would ensure that they have the ability to do that.
Is the classic example of this from the last 20 years the quick ramp up of MRAPs and MATVs out, like tactical wheeled vehicles that they rush to the battlefield in response to urgent operational needs, and all of a sudden they didn't have the sustainment and maintenance chain on the back end. Am I right in thinking that this kind of right to repair was implicated there? In other words, the forward deployed uniform personnel could not maintain them because of these contract obligations or restrictions, and the acquisitions folks didn't plan adequately for forward deployed engineer and service reps from the vendors, and so there's this gap where you had this basically wasteland of dead MATVs and MRAPs. Am I remembering that correctly?
You are. I think that's a unique.
That's maybe I'm blending a couple of times.
Yeah, that was a unique situation, right? Because in the buildup in the global war on terror, we basically built American cities and installations downrange, and then we had the capacity for if you built the the commonly remote operated weapon system, right? The fancy optical train and robotic machine gunner that went on top of the vehicles to keep soldiers from being exposed to direct fire and IEDs. That was a complicated system and it required a lot of maintenance. But we had the ability, we had the infrastructure close to where the fight was happening for FLIR or CROWS contractors to be there. And you could bring the vehicles back to the main operations, the main base or the main forward operating base for maintenance. So I think that we got in the habit of like, there's going to be a guy that works for the company, two bays down, with his air conditioning coming from a mini split like everybody else, next to the uniform folks, and that they'll just be there to fix this stuff. And I think we anticipate a more, in future conflicts, a much more expeditionary, faster moving fight where we are not building American installations nearby.
That is interesting.
Contractors.
It's interesting to think that like that shift that happened during the GWAT, the 20 years of GWAT, where we relied more and more and more on contractor support. This sounds like a swing back the other direction, which will have maybe a couple of benefits or impacts. One benefit would be we're probably going to spend less money maintaining things because contractors are expensive and uniform people are potentially less expensive, although the long tail on benefits and all that stuff from the retired crew and everything else, maybe that gets factored in some level, maybe it doesn't. The second would be more expeditionary capability like you're describing. In other words, you can't drag a giant train of contractors everywhere you go in the first island chain or expeditionary advanced base operations or whatever, and I doubt that the multi-domain task forces that are conceived of as like one of the ways that the Army deploys in future, I doubt they want to haul around a giant contractor chain to maintain all their systems and everything else. And a lot more capability is going to be deployed, hopefully, to this tactical environment, this highly expeditionary environment. And you need people to be able to maintain their own stuff or have uniformed folks close at hand.
So there's a hard question there about whether or not they can. Let's be really super clear here. A lot of the right to repair conversation is actually around requiring contractors to give up technical details and manuals just so people can read the book on how to fix the thing, because the odds of having everyone an expert, and we're not just talking trucks, we're talking radars, we're talking about we're repairing electronic equipment, which is no one is going to show up like, yeah, I know the guts of all 36 pieces of electronics that have been given here. What you're really going to have is, oh, I know how to get to the information that tells me what I can work on here.
That's interesting.
So like that is a big part of it. And the part of that GWAT equation was we didn't have time, but we had money. And so we just paid for people to show up, because the fastest way to solve the problem is to pay for a guy to fly out there who is an expert, right? Rather than like wait, because it's, you know, at the end of a deployment, you're going to be real sharp. But if you need something right now, you need expertise right now, and you don't have a few months for it to accrue inside of your formation, fly somebody out. It's an interesting topic. Shout out Senator Sheehy, who's been like leading from a congressional level on this right to repair issue. It's in the Army right now. Senator Sheehy has a bill to extend it to all of DoD, which I believe part of, or all of, some portion of, is definitely in the current Senate NDA, the NDA that passed the Senate. So it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out. But I know for sure that what Senator Sheehy pushed into the NDA includes this like technical manual information sharing, which is this own like Army challenge where some portion of the Army has to extract and then disseminate this technical information from their contractors so that formations can then make use of it. And that's like the real logistical challenge here.
Well, good on you, Senator Sheehy. I note also that it was a joint with Senator Warren, and seeing bipartisan efforts like that are always endearing to me because of the political polarization that we see literally every day. Fellas, I got to drop. You should keep rolling, and we'll see everybody else later from my side. And maybe to segue us on the topic of congressional bipartisanship, when is this shutdown going to end, Simon? And with that, I will leave it to you.
Finally, I've been left in control. This is where the podcast really takes off. All right. This is where we're really going to dig in. How does Simon actually feel about the world? But actually, I'll take the topic and we can wrap from here. We're at second longest shutdown in U.S. history, Dave. Congratulations. I know it's been a while, but I know you've wanted to be back and be a part of history again. I know that when I was in Fallujah during the surge, I was like, I'm a part of history. That's pretty cool. We did it again. We're back. We're knee deep in history making.
How far are we away from the longest in history?
We are at 26 days, which puts us at number 2. What was the number 1 longest? I don't know off the top of my head. I believe it was 35 days. I can find this out real fast. Hold on. It was 35 days. Look at that. So we're probably going to break it. Actually, my prediction is that we break the record.
I want you to make a specific prediction though. Like Price is Right style. Like it's going to be January 15th, or it's going to be.
Let me. You know what?
December 6th.
I'll put my prediction on it right now. Let me look at the calendar. I think, I can give you a week guesstimate. I think sometime on the week of November 24th is when this resolves. The last week of November is when.
Last week of November.
That's when I think we open the government back up.
All right. Well, if we're going Price is Right style over a case of Rippets, I can't remember. I haven't seen Price is Right in a long time. Yeah. I think it behooves me to say first week of December, right? Because then
because then you get
because then I get, if it's January or February or never.
That makes the most sense, because my window will continue to get smaller and yours will continue to get bigger.
Right.
If only Garrett was here to book in.
Book it. Yeah, then he would pick the second week of December. And I would be, that's
but the math there, in case you're wondering, is that the House passed a bill to reopen the government, and then they went out of session, right? So the House has not been in session since they passed that bill. None of the House members have come back to town. And that bill that they passed if it had become law, would have expired on November 21st. So no matter what, once you hit November 21st, the House will have to come back in session to do something new. And that's a Friday. So I think that November 24th, although actually now that I say that, I'm obviously very dumb. Thanksgiving. That's going to run right up against Thanksgiving, right? Am I crazy? Thanksgiving's on the 27th. So this makes a lot of sense. They come into session on the 24th, 2 or 3 days before Thanksgiving, and they have to do something. And if they don't do something, allegedly, they would need to stay in D.C. during the holidays.
They don't get to go home and see their families at Thanksgiving. Yeah.
But I think I'm not as confident in that as I used to be. I could actually see them sending everybody home and being like, whatever, we'll leave it shut down. So who knows? But still, that's my guess.
So your bet is basically before Thanksgiving, and my bet is basically after Thanksgiving. And there's a what's at stake here? A case of Rip-Its?
Do they sell them by the case? Is that
they have to? It's almost guaranteed.
I like 5 Rip-Its by the case. I've only ever seen them in individual cans and then shipping containers. Those are the 2 versions of Rip-Its that I'm familiar with.
I'll bet you I can find a
quad con full of Rip-Its.
Oh yeah, I don't. One search in Amazon's got 30 solutions for me. Would you like get an American flag color?
Amazon's going to send you a bunch of Rip-Its that are like plastic wrapped together. They're not going to have like that nice monster cardboard box that feels like a case, right? It's going to be some flat piece of cardboard with plastic tightening everything up. This is also a variety pack. That's no good. I'm American flag cans only.
All right, I'll figure it out.
Only. Yeah, we'll figure it out once we figure out who wins. And then we'll sort it out then. But that being said, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.